Okay, should I start?
Yes, please, Jackie.
So I am Jitendra Bhapna and I'm a senior solution architect working at the EPAM systems. So I have overall like 14 years of experience in APIs and the integration technology. I am a MuleSoft ambassador and like I am the meetup leader for Surat Nasik and engineering student group. And like I have almost published more than 300 plus YouTube videos and 150 articles on MuleSoft and Anypoint platform. So my main expertise like in setting up MuleSoft platform, which include hybrid implementation, CloudUp. So CloudUp in CloudUp, like I have a vast experience in setting up Anypoint VPC, VPN, dedicated load balancer, then customer hosted Mule runtime, and also like I have some experience on setting up runtime fabric on EKS, and also runtime fabric on customer hosted Mule runtime. So basically, like apart from that, like I have expertise in API led connectivity and event driven architecture. Then also like I am also involved in various projects where like I've defined the migration strategy from on-premise to cloud hub, and like like runtime fabric manager to the cloud hub, and like also like how we can migrate from lower version to higher version of Mule runtime. So yeah, that is all about me. So agendas for today's meetup we already done with the introduction part. The next thing we will see what is a GraphQL and like what is Anypoint Data Graph. Then we will see some of the use cases. So we will going to see three use cases where we can make use of Anypoint Data Graph. So mostly we will pick up a banking use case, open banking use case. Then there will be live demonstration. Also we can see like some operational capabilities of Anypoint Data Graph, like how we can like enabled how we can see the tracing and monitoring, then like what are the restriction with Anypoint Data Graph. Finally there will be QEs. Okay, so what is a GraphQL basically? So basically a GraphQL is open source data query, and it's a manipulation language for your API basically. So basically it's nothing, it's a open source query language for your REST API. So basically like let's take an example. You have a database, so simply you can run in your database you have a 10 fields, like and you can run the select statement, column 1 and column 2 from that particular table. So it will give a two column, basically it will return the two columns data, right? So in same way like you can query your REST API response basically. Okay, so it is developed by the Facebook in 2012, and it was made public, like it was made open source in 2015 basically. So it also allow you to send the query to your API and get the required data. So generally what happens, so I will give an example. So let's consider I have on my REST API. So let my REST API is returning me a 10 field basically, right? So there might be some consumer, like they don't want all the fields, right? They may, some of the consumer may require all 10 fields, some of the consumer may require 5 fields, some of the consumer may require 2 fields. I will take one example. So mobile application, generally if you see mobile application doesn't want all the data, and like web application want more data basically, right? So in this case like you can use the GraphQL to query the required data basically, right, from your REST API. So that is the one of the advantage of GraphQL. So right, so even there are various functions or various capability provided by a GraphQL, like filtering, sorting, searching, pagination, and join operation basically, right? So as you know, the REST APIs are powerful and follow the resource oriented and well structured approach. So generally, like when we talk about the REST API, we talk about the resources in URI path, right? However, whenever the data is complex, it is not possible to fetch all the data within the single request, as it involves the various operation and routes to get a more complex, right? So what does this mean? So generally what happens, so there might be requirement, you have to fetch the data from 10 different sources basically, then you have to aggregate those data and send this data to the consumer, right? So in that case what you will do, so like you will write a orchestration, like you will write one orchestration. That orchestration will call all the 10 different API, collect the data, it will aggregate the data, and it will send to the consumer. But with GraphQL, like you don't have to write the orchestration and all those things. So GraphQL, like it provide inbuilt capability where like it can call the multiple data, multiple REST API, aggregate the data from them and send to the consumer basically, right? So as I mentioned, like GraphQL is very useful in such cases, like structured data in the form of graph with a powerful syntax for traversing, retrieving, and modifying data. So GraphQL can be used for like retrieving or fetching or traversing, and even for modifying the data. Even the one of the main advantage with GraphQL is like it will always return you a predictable data. So basically, you can request what data you want, right? So that can be request to the GraphQL, and GraphQL will provide that result only. So if you are requesting, I want, like, let's take example, I want employee ID and I want first name and the last name, right? So you will get only these three data. Let my web application want like employee ID, first name, last name, address, contact detail. So you will get all this data from the GraphQL basically, right? Any question on GraphQL basically?
No questions as of now, Jackie.
Okay. The next thing, it's come to Anypoint Data Graph. So what is Anypoint Data Graph? So generally the MuleSoft has leveraged GraphQL to to create Anypoint Data Graph basically, right? So generally it leverages a GraphQL to enhance the consumer ability of the APIs basically. So generally every time you add the API, new API to your application network, right? So Anypoint platform store it as a graph of metadata basically, right? So it will store the data in the form of graph in the data graph basically. So generally data graph is a managed service like recently launched in 2021 by the MuleSoft, which allow you to unify the multiple APIs into a single data service. So generally what does this mean? So GraphQL provide, or sorry, Anypoint Data Graph provide a endpoint, right? So you can send the request to that particular endpoint and you can send your query to on that endpoint. So now from there, Anypoint Data Graph will automatically call all the required downstream API and collect the data. It will aggregate it and send back to the consumer basically, right? So that's why I'm saying is a component of Anypoint platform which allow you to unify the multiple API into a single data service, right? Anypoint Data Graph is the unified platform for API to design, develop, and manage. It allow to discover, manage, or serve the data from multiple APIs using a single data graph endpoint or data graph request. So generally let's consider I have a four endpoints. So like I have accounts, I have a transaction, I have a balances, and I have a statement. So I want to fetch all this data into a single request. So what I can do, I can send the request to Anypoint Data Graph, I can send a query, right? So the request will come to Anypoint Data Graph. So now the Anypoint Data Graph will take care of your orchestration part. It will call all the endpoint, right? Collect the data from all the endpoints. It will aggregate the data and it will send back to the consumer. So here, like, we are removing the overhead of like orchestration of the call. You don't have to write any manual codes, or you don't have to write a bigger complex code. So it will automatically handle by your Anypoint Data Graph. So what advantage we are getting? It will reduce the lot of efforts for developer to call multiple API and aggregate the response. So generally what you will do, like, let's consider what you will do in this case. Let, if Anypoint Data Graph is not there, what you will going to do in this case? Basically you will have a multiple system API, right? You will have a process API, and you will be having a experience API. So generally, like, you already have a system API. The process API, like the process API will send the request to all the system API. Like he wants account detail, he will send the account, fetch the account detail from one of the system API, fetch the transaction detail from one of the system API. Then that process API will do aggregation of data, then it's sent to the experience API, then experience API will send to the consumer, right? So here we have to write some like orchestration layer basically, or process layer, where we can do the like all this aggregation of data, like routing or orchestration or choreography of the call, all those things, right? So with Anypoint Data Graph you can avoid that basically. Yeah. In case if you have some heavy business logic, like it's not only like restricted to routing or like aggregation of data, but you have some lot of business logic, like some, there are a lot of condition. In that case you cannot remove your process layer, you have to keep your process layer. here, in case like if you want to do routing to the multiple APIs and you want to do the aggregation of data, in that case you can remove the process layer and you can make use of Anypoint Data Graph basically instead of that, right? And you also, like if you see like we have a three layer, like system layer, process layer, and experience layer. Once we have created a process layer, once we have created the system layer, the most of the time the changes happen on the experience layer. We may need to add some channel specific API in the experience layer, right? So with Anypoint Data Graph, like we can definitely reduce like process layer and your system layer, sorry, process layer and your experience layer basically, right? Uh, like as I mentioned, like if the use case is something like you want to just do the routing or aggregation of data, or like the like consumer is requesting like fewer field than other consumer, in that case you can definitely make use of Anypoint Data Graph basically. But for complex data logic or complex business logic, you cannot, because you cannot write any business logic in Anypoint Data Graph. So it's all about configuration. You cannot write any custom code or anything on Anypoint Data Graph. It's a completely managed service. You don't have to worry about the hardware and all those things. It doesn't deploy anything on the runtime manager basically, right? It's a completely managed service, right? So like you don't have to worry about how the data graph will scale, what about downtimes. It's a completely kind of SaaS product, software as a service basically. Any question?
Questions, Jackie.
Yeah.
So Muranda is asking, is data graph used on experience API layer?
Okay. So like as I mentioned, like if you want to do, let's just the route, if you want to do the orchestration of call, and then after orchestration of call, like you just want to aggregate the data, right, and send that data to the consumer. In this case definitely you don't require the process layer, also you don't require the experience layer also. You Anypoint Data Graph provide its own endpoints, so request will come on that endpoint, then Anypoint Data Graph will automatically do the orchestration of the call, like collect the data, it will do the aggregation, and it will send to the consumer. In case if there is some complex business logic and so in that case you will definitely require the process layer, and also the other thing, the Anypoint Data Graph only support a get method. It doesn't support post, put, or patch any other method. It is only supporting a get method. So for fetching data, aggregation data, routing of the call, it's fine. For any other like HTTP method, you cannot use Anypoint Data Graph. And like for heavy business logic, like you cannot make use of like data graph also. Like when I say business logic, like you have a lot of condition, if and else, like lot of if and else, like in that case you cannot use that, right? Is this answer your question, Vrinda? Akshay, I will
Thanks,
come on that.
thanks
Data
for
graph
the
will fetch the data from public API or the private to organization. I will definitely come on this. Okay. So when once I will show the demo, I will answer this question.
thank you, Jackie, for answering Brinda's question and Akshay. Sashank has a question, Jackie. Here's about a typical use case. Just take a look on that question, Jackie, if you want to talk about this right now or during the Q&A session.
Early to ask, but here is one doubt we are not able to figure out, and Mule team is working on. We are looking with data graph, but we have a issue when data graph view is supposed to pull up from existing API deploy and try to pick from Mule API manager. Have you seen any issue in this? We have also ticket open with Mule and engineering team is looking into it. So assuming this should be generic issue. Shashank, I have never faced this kind of issue. Like I have set up Anypoint Data Graph at like I have like done some POCs and set up, like we are in process of setting up this Anypoint Data Graph for one of the client, but like we haven't faced this kind of issue actually. So, but you can give me more clarity on this issue, right? Then we can look into that. Like here you are saying like you whenever you try to fetch the data, it is like trying to pick from APM. Have you seen this issue? Uh, if you can provide me more detail, then I can put some highlights on that basically.
Yeah, we will discuss this in during the Q&A then in that case, Jackie,
Yeah.
and we
Can
can
data
proceed with the
graph
demo.
be?
Yeah,
Yeah. When I will Sashank, when I will do the demo, you can showcase me exactly where you are facing the issue. Okay. Can data graph be used instead of process layer if we fetch the data? Yeah, you can definitely earlier, and you can like you can definitely use the data graph basically. You just fetching the data and you are doing the aggregation, right? You can definitely use that. And even like you can remove the experience API in case like the requirement is like that the mobile application require the fewer field than web application. That is the only requirement. Even in that case, you can remove the experience API. But it depends like Hariharan, like all this might not be always correct. Basically, this is very subjective. So it depends on the requirement exactly what kind of like there are many like thing like where is your application exist, like it's in VPC or it's outside the VPC. So there are a lot of if and buts. But as I mentioned, like in use case where you have to fetch the data, you just have a simple aggregation and routing logic. You can definitely use of Anypoint Data Graph. You can definitely remove the process layer. Okay, so let me go to
Thank
next slide.
you. Thank you, Jackie, for taking the
Yeah,
question.
yeah. So Anypoint Data Graph advantage. So as I mentioned, you can unify a multiple API into a single data service. So like with Anypoint Data Graph, like you can serve the data from multiple underlying API with a single request without writing any code. So this is the advantage. Like as I mentioned, whenever you want to do aggregation of data, whenever you have to do the orchestration of data, you don't have to write a single line of code basically, right? You have to do the simple configuration that will like enable Anypoint Data Graph endpoint for you basically. So even you can consume the data from multiple API using a single request. So you can so you can fetch the data or you can fetch the data from multiple API in the single request. You can send a data graph query to data graph, and in that you can like describe I want to call these three APIs. So data graph will automatically call these three API. It will fetch the data, it will aggregate the data and send the response back to the consumer. So developer doesn't have to write code. So this is good thing, like you don't have to write a single line of code. As I mentioned, Anypoint Data Graph is the managed service, so you don't have to worry about the maintenance, your patching, So like infrastructure, it's a completely a SaaS product, software as a service. So you can request the data. So like you can request like how much data you want. Like like you if you want two fields, you just request two fields. If you want five fields, you just request five fields. It will also reduce the network congestion, like passing the two fields and passing the five fields on the network, it's a different, right? So like it's count in the KB. Like if you are passing the 1 KB of payload, if you are passing the 5 KB of payload, it make big difference. So in one request it doesn't make big difference. Whenever you have a thousand of requests, in that case it make a bigger difference basically. So it, as I mentioned, it reduce the development and maintenance effort. So as I mentioned, Anypoint Data Graph is managed service. You don't have to worry about the underlying infrastructure and the maintenance. Yeah, I will come on this. So basically Anypoint Data Graph provide it's like good tracing capability. So where like let consider like you may do the orchestration of call, you may call 3 or 4 API. So generally in that case Anypoint Data Graph send the request to all the 4 API in the parallel basically. It send the request concurrently basically. And you can using this particular tracing capability, you can exactly see how much time taken by a one API basically. Like it have like it took 54 millisecond or 50 millisecond, how much time taken by other API. This is very useful. You are like there are some restriction with Anypoint Data Graph, we will going to discuss this, but this is very useful. This tracing is very useful. You can exactly find out which API is taking more time for sending response back to the Anypoint Data Graph basically. So right now Anypoint Data Graph support a few authentication mechanism: basic authentication, client ID enforcement with header, query parameter, and some custom, like you can add some custom header or query parameters. But like I have one solution where you can like enable other authentication mechanism for Anypoint Data Graph. I will show that, like so there are some restriction. So just look at this restriction. So Anypoint Data Graph support like only the REST API, which is like designed using Dremel or Open API specification. It only support a get method. So like you can add 250 API. So in your API network, in your application network of Anypoint Data Graph, there can be 250 API. One API can have n number of endpoints, but in simple word, you can just add 250 application. Okay, not more than that. So like 16,000 field per unified schema. So with like you have a 250 API, so like let's consider it should not have a more than 16,000 fields basically per unified schema. Okay. Anypoint data graph restrict the downstream REST call. So basically, whenever anypoint data graph call the downstream API, so there are some restrictions applied to that also. The maximum of 150 concurrent or ongoing call. So basically, at the same time, it can have a 150 calls like to the downstream API, concurrent call, right? So not more than. Let's consider if there are 150 concurrent call is ongoing. If 150 for one request come, it will get timed out. It will get rejected basically. Okay, the maximum of 5 MB of response data per call. So generally whenever like we getting the data from the any endpoint, the payload should not exceed the size of 5 MB basically. So there are some other limitation related to timeout. So 30-second timeout per query. So let's consider like I have sent the query to data graph, and data graph will call like let's consider 10 downstream API. In that case, all these 10 downstream API must respond with this within the 30 seconds. Otherwise, it will get timeout. Like So let's consider I got the response from 5 API. I haven't got the response from the 5 API basically within that 30 seconds. So generally, what data graph do? It will aggregate the data from that 5 API, and for other 5 API, it will send the data exception error basically. Okay. So maximum of 100 selector field per query. So like you can just in Anypoint data graph query, you can like, ask for 100 field, not more than that. Okay. So these are the some restriction. So while designing Anypoint data graph, you have to ensure that you have taken care of this restriction basically. So let's consider like we will going to discuss some of the use cases. So one of the use cases like let's consider this is my Anypoint data graph basically. So I have configured my Anypoint data graph. So I have mobile application, I have a web application. So my mobile application, like I have one like let's consider I have a banking API. In banking API I want to fetch the account details. So my mobile application saying I don't want all the fields, I just require 4 fields, whereas web application saying I required all the fields, right? So they can send the data graph query, like that query to the data graph. Data graph will call the accounts API, and accounts API will respond with all the data. Anypoint data graph will do the filter out of data, like remove the like fields depending on query. It will like add or it will not add. It will remove the field and send to the mobile API, and whatever comes in the query from desktop, it will send to the like web application or desktop basically, right? So this is the first use case for Anypoint data graph. Any question on this? Like this is very important use case. So is like I don't have to create a two separate experience API basically. One is for mobile application, one is for web application. I can simply use the data graph endpoint. I can send the query, right, to Anypoint data graph, and I can request what kind of what type of fields I require basically, and how many fields I require basically. So Anypoint data graph will like respond with like those number of fields. It will not add more or it will not remove anything So that's a use case one. Let's consider use case two. So generally, I have one application, like I have an open banking API. In this open banking API, I have a three endpoint: account, balances, and the transactions, basically, right? So generally, like each account have a balance and each account have a transactions, basically, correct? So this is my banking API. So now, what happening like? So generally, what will happen if I'm not using the Anypoint data graph? So here I will put the process API. The process API will do the orchestration or choreography of the call. It will fetch the data. It will aggregate the data. Then it will send to the web API. In case of when request coming from web application, it will send the response to the mobile API, mobile experience API when request is coming from mobile application, right? But with Anypoint data graph, like you don't have to create all this thing, like so you can simply use the Anypoint data graph. So you can configure all this account, like you can configure open banking API in this particular Anypoint data graph. So web API, web application will say I want account detail, from account I want this field. I want balances detail, from balance I want this field. I want transaction detail, from transactions I want this field. Same thing, like goes with API basically. Like any question on this two use case, like we are going to live demo before, any question?
One question from Sashank. So he's saying, Jackie, if the system API is taking around 10 seconds, then that's a limitation of data graph.
Yeah, see, whenever a data graph send a request to the downstream API, right? No, so the like let's consider like I will give an example from like my presentation. So let consider. So I got a request. So Anypoint Data Graph has to do the three calls basically here, right? So these three calls has to be complete within the 30 seconds, like So even like if this API taking 11 seconds, this API is taking 10 seconds, this API is taking 10 seconds. This is fine. Like your whole request will complete it within 11 and 12 seconds, basically, right? Because this like Anypoint Data Graph will send the request concurrently to all these three API. In case if accounts is taking 31 seconds, balance is taking 20 seconds, transaction is taking 21 seconds, right? In that case, so we will get the response, we will get the aggregated response for balance and transaction. For account, it will throw the data exception error basically. So request must be completed within the 30 seconds. Doesn't matter like if downstream API is not able to respond within the 30 seconds. It will throw the exception for that particular API. Is this answer your question?
Yeah, he got the answer, Jackie. Thank you. Yeah, we can proceed with the demo,
Yeah,
Jackie.
what are the authentication, right? So as I mentioned, it support only two authentication mechanism, like basic authentication and like client ID enforcement with header or query parameters. But I have an option where I can enable JWT validation policies and other thing also. I will show you, like I will just discuss that with you. Okay, let me go to my Anypoint platform. Okay, so basically, like I will just show, like we are working with open banking API, right? So let me show that open banking. So generally the first prerequisite, your API, right, must be written in RAML and open API specification. So this is my open banking API. So that is written in RAML basically. So it have a few endpoints. So if you see, like it have a few endpoint: account, get all account, get single account, get a balances for that account, like transactions, and like so there are some other method. Post method doesn't support by Anypoint Data Graph. So yeah, and there are some getting the transactions. So we will see that. So apart from that, I have like I will go to API manager. I set up this particular API in API manager. So you can see my open banking API is in API manager. So the option I have used the basic endpoint. So it means when I deploy the application in CloudUp, so it should be like it will peer with API manager using the API auto discovery. So in this case, if you go to runtime manager, so I have deployed my application into runtime manager. So somebody asked me some question like let me close this. I will show like so this is my open banking API. Let me open this. Okay, so URL for this is this. So what I've done, so if you see, go to API manager again. In open banking API, you will see the consumer endpoint. This is my, this is my cloud up endpoint basically. Let me open the Postman. So we will go by use case by use case. This is my API. Let me send the request. So I got all list of accounts, right? But the what is our first use case? So like now like my mobile application saying I don't want all the fields, right? Whereas web application saying I am fine with all the fields. So we will going to see how we can use this use case. So this is the single. If I want to face a single account, I can use account, right? If I want to face the balances for that account, okay, I got the balances for that account. So let me go to my Anypoint Data Graph. So you got it, right? So the prerequisite is that the API must be written in RAML and open API specification, right? The second prerequisite, like I have set up It's not compulsory, but for me, my right now my API is in API manager basically. Runtime manager I deployed to the cloud hub, and also I've set up the API manager API is in the API manager, and I have used the auto discovery to peer my cloud hub application with the API manager basically. So you can see this is active basically, right? So now what I will do, I will go to Anypoint Data Graph, and you can see add API. Here it will list down all the API, like for like list down all the API. Other requirement is that once you return the RAML, you publish your API in Anypoint Exchange. So for now, I will use the Open Banking API. I will just say configure URL. Okay. So here it will pick the latest version. Like I will say conform selection. So I have already configured my API in API manager. It will automatically pick that consumer URL which I have set up on the API manager API basically. Somebody asked me like if I want to add some different URL. So like my API is not in API manager basically. It exists publicly somewhere basically, right? So in that case, you can simply say add new URL and you can add that particular URL basically. Okay, you can simply do that. But still, you will require the RAML or Open API specification, and it must be published to the Anypoint Exchange. That is the requirement. Okay, so that you have to do. Let's consider I have some APIs written in the Java. I have some APIs like written in some Spring Boot language or some other technology, right? And I want to enable the Anypoint Data Graph capability for that. And though like whatever API written in Spring Boot or Java, that is publicly that can be accessible over the internet basically. So in this case, what I will do, I will simply use the add new URL. First thing, I will write the RAML or Open API specification for that particular API which is written in some other technology. Then I will publish to the Anypoint Exchange. Then I can configure the URL, exact URL where is your API. Right now my API is not on Cloud Hub, so I can use this option add new URL. But somebody asked me like if my API exists in on-premise and all those things, then in that case, like from Cloud Hub, how I can connect the on-premise. But there are some options where you can keep your Anypoint Data Graph in VPCs and all those things, like and you can make use of VPC, and like from VPC you can create a VPN connections. Okay, so once you do that, then you can configure that on-premise URL also. Okay, so right now I will go with this particular get existing URL from Anypoint platform. I will say provide authentication method. So this is authentication mechanism for your downstream API basically. So right now, if you see my downstream API doesn't have any authentication mechanism, so I will simply say no auth. Otherwise, like it can use like basic client id header. Like if you are, let's consider if my API like a downstream API is supporting JWT validation policy or like OAuth kind of authentication, you don't have option basically to use this. Okay, so for now I will go with no auth. Then I will say preview schema. Yeah, you it lists down all the methods like account fetch, the account fetch, single account fetch, balance, all this thing. Edit schema. I don't want to do anything. I want to like if you want to disable any method, you can do it from here. But I will keep everything on. Just add to unified schema. So it will take few minutes. Till that I can take if any question here.
Questions, Jackie. So Ankit has got a question. For using data graph, is it necessary to make instance of application in API manager?
Yeah, Ankit, I already explained, right? So like you don't have to create every time. Like if your application in cloud or like even it's in like you don't have to do that. You can directly provide that cloud of URL also. You don't have to do that. Okay, you don't have to. You can directly use the add new URL option basically. Yeah.
Okay.
So your
Shashank,
raml was having the specific CDT. What CDT, like what is CDT?
while custom defined types,
Yeah.
Shashank is saying.
Yeah, Sasank, that's a problem like with data graph. It should be custom defined data type or something like that. If you put example, right, it doesn't get reflected in any point data graph. I have seen that issue, Sasank. That is what you're asking, right?
Can we have a RAML where response is type object?
Object, like when you say object, like Generally, I haven't tried, but it should work. If you are giving example, right, that example is not working actually. But if you're defining the data type or library, in that case, it is working basically. Can you give me one example, Shashank? Like,
So while Sashank responds, there is another question from Akshay. So Jackie, is there any limitation? One unified schema per business group?
it's not on a per business group. It's on like environment. Like it's on like you can up to 250 unified schema. Like up to 250. I discussed that, right? So let me show that PPT again. So you can up to 255 APIs per unified schema. So like it depend on your license subscription basically, like so by default if you are going with any you get a one unified schema, but you can opt for more. It depend on your license subscription. There's a no limitation on that. If you want 10 you can go for 10, if you want 20 you can go for 20.
Sashank, are you ready with the example? Or we can proceed with the presentation? I will email the specifics. Okay, yeah. Then he will connect with you, Jackie. Let's proceed with the presentation. Thanks,
Shashank,
Sashank.
are you in my LinkedIn, right? You can connect me and like I can provide the solution. Like I've seen like there are few issues. Like you are right. Like some generally we have to define custom data type. Then it works, right? I've seen that when you're putting example or object, it is not working. Like it is not picking up the proper fields also, right? Are you facing the similar issue, Shashank? So let me, so I think my data graph is up to date, so it has been deployed. So next thing, like if you see there's an option called run a query. Okay, here you can see like yeah, here you can define your query basically. So basically like I want accounts, right? So and the customer ID is my query parameter 123. It will list down all query. It also provide the intelligence, like if I put, I want first name, I want last name, I want company, then I want account type, I want phone, I want website address. You can run it. Once you'll run it, you will get the response back. Like now I don't want this three fields. I can simply remove that. Okay. But my other requirement is that like I want to do the sorting. So right. So what I want account type after last name. So I can put account type here, right? So I got the account type here, at the third place after last name. Sometimes there might be requirement like you want a field in specific order, right? In that case, like yeah, like data graph also provides some kind of the way in which you are sending the data, you will get the way in which you are sending the query, right? You will get the response back in the same way, right? In the same order only, right? So you can see that.
Jackie, Jackie, sorry to interrupt. Can you zoom in your screen, like font size, if possible? Yeah, this is good. Thank you.
Yeah, you can see. So now also like you can just run the query, you keep running, you will get all these things. Yeah, you can trace the query also. So you can say your option here to trace the query, and you can run it again. And here it will be showing like so it called like close this accounts API. So generally first it do parsing, which took 3 millisecond, then validation 1 millisecond, then it called the accounts API, which took almost 31 milliseconds. Like the whole request get completed in 33 milliseconds, right? So those kind of, I will show like more in detail. So when we will go with some complex use cases, this is just a simple one right now, right? Also like if you want to view the credential, you can see that credentials, right? So if you want to invoke your graph from like Anypoint data graph from uh, Postman or something like that, you can use this credential. You can pass the client ID and client secret in the Postman, basically in the header parameter. I'm missing one point. Okay, So this is one we have done with first use case. Now let me go to a second use case. So where like I want this account balances transactions, right? So in this case, like I want to call a multiple endpoints basically. So here I don't have to do any configuration. We have already configured our accounts API basically, or our open banking API. I will simply use a balances account by balance ID. Then it will provide like for which account you want. It's 123, right? And I want amount. I want balance type. Then also accounts. I want transactions, right? Yeah, this is something like I should not write account ID again and again, but that is one thing. So let me do transaction ID, then transaction date, then currency, then amount. Let these fields are enough. I will run the query. Here you can see like okay, I know what's the problem. Uh, Let me check. I know what is the problem. Here again, I have done some mistake here. It's not 123, it's one. Okay, that's the problem. I want first name, I want last name. Yeah, that's enough ID. Okay, I can run it. So I got like account details for that particular ID, account ID one. I got the balance and I got the transactions for that particular account ID. Okay, but this particular name doesn't looks good actually. So you can add always you can add alias, right? And okay, so you can run it. So now you can see it looks better transaction. Now let me trace a query. Okay, let me showcase this. Let me. So here you can see like it has done three API call accounts or three endpoints call or three accounts balances and the transactions basically, right? So this happens concurrently like it start with accounts. After few milliseconds it's also send the request to balances, like just a difference of 2 milliseconds, right? Then it also in like it also send the request to the transaction. See, as you mentioned, like the whole query get should execute it within 30 seconds. If we are not doing parallel call, right, what will happen? You will always get a timeout basically, right? So here it will show my whole request got completed within 30, 71 milliseconds. Like it's so fast, right? So it completed in 71 milliseconds. So you can see it here, right? So any doubt on these two use cases?
As of now, Jackie, we are good with the questions. Only Sashank question is left. We'll discuss in detail during the QA. But
Yeah.
apart from Sashank, I don't have any questions.
Okay. Now use case three. Okay. So let's consider like I have a two API. I have accounts. So accounts API is it's a separate API, and I have a customer API. It's a completely separate API basically. So it have a two endpoints, one to fetch all the customer and one to fetch a single customer. Whereas it have a account. Uh, uh, we have accounts API where you can fetch the account detail or single account basically. So there are two endpoints in both the API, and like so my requirement is that like when I fetch the account detail, even I want to fetch associated customer who like I have account, like who is the customer for that account. I want to fetch the first name, last name, the customer ID for that particular account, right? So here what is happening, the account ID will be the primary key in the accounts, right? And the customer ID will be the primary key in customer API. Then I have one field in account, that is the customer ID, which is a foreign key in the accounts API, right? So here we will just set up some kind of relationship between accounts and the customer API in our Anypoint data graph like I will show you. So just try to understand this use case. So like the request will come to Anypoint Data Graph. Anypoint Data Graph will call both the API. It will fetch the data, like what, so depending on what kind of relation we have set up, and it will send the response back to the mobile or web API basically. So let me start with third example. So for now, I will go to data graph. So I'm just removing this schema, like for now. So I'm just deleting, like nobody have any doubt, right? So I will remove this. Okay. Then I will say add API. I want to add a customer API first. Next, configure URL. So I already have a, like everything set up. Like I have already set up the application and everything. So if you see, let me copy this URL. Let me show to you. So API, I have customers. So I have few customers here. Like even I can fetch a single customer, right? So yeah, provide authentication. So there is a no authentication to my downstream API preview schema. So okay. So next, edit schema. Here you have to do the collaboration. So you have to define your primary key. So for that you will click it here, and like you say enable collaboration. So for that you also require one method which can uniquely fetch a customer. So I already have a one method, right, which can uniquely fetch a customer basically on the basis of customer ID. I will select this method. Next, then I have to select the primary key. A customer ID is my primary key, and I will say confirm. Okay. So here it will showcase a customer ID as a primary key. If you want to like visible or like disable some kind of field, you can do it here. So whenever, like if you disable any field here, so somebody, if we are requesting that field in the data, that field will be never written basically, because we have disabled it here. So make sure like whatever you want to enable or whatever you want to disable, you can do it from here. You can add to unified schema, proceed to. So it will take some time.
Question from Yatisha. How to call the data graph from Postman?
Yeah, that's a good question. Like I'm searching endpoint. Let me check where the endpoint. I will show that also. Okay, so don't worry. I will show that also. I'm just checking. Go to UPI. Yeah, just a minute. I got the endpoint. So this is my endpoint, right? Graphql endpoint. I will show you. So you can go to Postman. Just copy this endpoint. Okay, and then like you just select this as a GraphQL basically. Okay, and also you have to pass some header, like and just hide this. Yeah, I will add two header, a client ID and client secret. Okay, so let's wait while application is deploying. I'll show you. Okay, okay, just a minute. I think it's good now, Akshay, right?
Oh, I was not able to hear anything. So was there any noise coming in?
Yeah, like there was fan, it's a fan noise.
Oh, I see. I was not able to hear it. Thank you for pointing it out, Akshay. Thank you so much.
Ariana, I don't think you can download anything. If you want to download, you can download the RAML directly from Design Center, not from here. Let me check if application is deployed. So let me copy, like unified schema. I can go to run query. So I want to like copy the credentials, like so how can we do that? So you can go it here, view current credentials, copy this client ID. Okay, then so copy this. Okay, so these are the things. Now you have to pass a body, you have to pass a query. So I will create a query. Let me This is accounts query, so it will not work. So I want customers. Okay, so I can say customers, and no, okay, I just want customers. In customer, I want first name, I want last name, and I want address, I want country, I want age. Okay, I will just run query. I got the response. I can copy this query. I can go to Postman. I can run this. You get the response back in Postman also, right? So you have to just ensure that you are just configuring the right client ID in the client secret. So if you want to generate a new client ID, new client secret, so you have an option. Let me show that. You go to API manager. Okay, so here you have a data graph administration. So like what kind of auto policy you want to apply, you can do this. Right now client ID is applied. Okay, so you can you can do it from here. Basically, like if you want to say any kind of contract, so right now I have create one contract, right? So this is my client ID, the client secret. You can revoke this, like you can create the more contract here basically. Okay, so this is for administration purpose. So just I want to showcase to you. So I let me go back to data graph. So we have done the customer API enabled, right? So we have like set up the customer API in which like we have a customer ID as a primary key. Now I will add the accounts API. So I will say configure URL. So I have already all the prerequisite done, so next provide authentication. No authentication for downstream API, previous schema. So I have a two methods, face the all account, face the single account, edit schema. So here I will click on this and I will enable collaboration, accounts by account ID. Next, I will select account ID as the primary key, confirm. Then you go below, you have to link account and the customer, right? So link to another type. So account needs to be linked with the customers. In customer ID is the primary key. In account, the customer ID is the foreign key. So I don't want to hide this field. I want to make it visible. So always like once you do this configuration, so if you see the account response basically, right? In accounts, we have a customer ID basically. Okay. So we are linking this customer ID as a foreign primary key in customers, and customer ID is the primary key in accounts basically. So you just make sure you always click on this save changes. So sometime what happen, we do the configuration here, we simply click on add to unified schema. So we forget to save this, right? So add to unified schema, proceed to unified schema. So guys, I will ask one question. You can think on that. So let's consider like if I want to enable JWT validation policy on my GraphQL endpoint, how can I do that? Can anybody think on that and answer me? Is there any way?
Let me know if anyone wants to talk.
But once I will create a proxy, right? So you are right. Then how I will add the authentication between proxy and Anypoint data graph. So right, so even like data graph has like client ID and client secret, how I will do that? Let me show, I will show that demo also. It's fine, right? Yes, we have some 10-15 minutes more, right?
Yeah, sure.
So I'm waiting for this particular demo. So it's take at least 1 or 2 minutes. So I'm waiting. So let me run the query. Guys, I want to show one more demo. So I have a two more demo. So that will give a fair idea on any point data graph. So let me check. Yeah, accounts start displaying. So
We can take any questions if anyone has in between.
okay, I have accounts, account ID, customer ID, account type. Okay. So let me query this. I got all the accounts detail, but I also want a relative customer detail. So I can say customers. In customers, I want a customer ID. I want first name and last name. I want address. I want country. Okay. I'll send this. So no, I've done something wrong. It should be inside this. Okay. Yeah. Just some query issue. Let me fix it. Just, just give me a second.
Take your time, Jackie. So Ankit is giving a clue,
No,
Jackie.
no, no, we don't have to pass ID. No, no, just I will fix it. No, I know what is the problem. This is a query issue. See, it's we don't have to pass ID, right? So let me check accounts, account ID, because this is not yet deployed, right? That might be issue. We send this query. Okay, I got this. Now it should work. Customers, so customer ID. I want first name, last name. Let me send the query. I got this. Okay. So we should not pass, right? So it will automate. See, we have already defined relation, right? We have already enabled the collaboration. So we don't have to pass the ID. Here you can see like what it does, right? I will show in the trace query also. You will get a fair idea. So I have account ID. So 123, then customer ID. So for account, always return one more field, that is the customer ID. Let me check if the account type is also there. Okay, account type customer ID. So now what it will do, it will go to it will call that customer by ID, right? There's a method by customer ID. It will fetch the customer detail again. Like for this, it will again fetch the customer details. Like, so if, like, I have a five accounts, so it will call that customer API, customer by ID API, for five times. So let's consider if you have a thousand, like if your payload has like 100 accounts, right? So it will call like your customer API for 100 times, right? So if you like in this scenario, you should not use this kind of thing. Basically, if you want to fetch a single account and like related customer data, that in that case it's fine. If you have 100 of records and for 100 of accounts, for each account you have to fetch the customer detail, right? So it will go and hit the customer API for 100 times, and and your 30 seconds will go over. Like let me show with trace query. Okay. So you will see the account API has been called for five times. So like the first time, like I have this zeroth account. So like this is the first account, the customer API has been called, right? You can see that even this is happening in parallel, but so like I have a like second account, the customer API has been called. Like for second account, sorry, for third account, the customer API is called again. For fourth account, the customer API is called again. And for fifth account, the customer. So it has been called for five times, right? It's like if you have 100 of like accounts and you want to fetch the customer for details for each API, like sometime it may like your 30 seconds may over basically, right? So you have to think like, where to use this kind of thing basically. Let me show other example. Okay, so I will go with approach this approach where like if you want to fetch a single account, okay, where I want account ID, customer ID, account type, and customer. This is the customer objects, right? Customer graph, customer ID. I want first name, I want last name, I want age. Okay, so let me fetch this. It's no, it's 123. Okay, I got the account ID. So like for single, it's fine. Like if you trace query, it is very fast. You can see it, right? The request completed within less than 38 milliseconds, something around that, or like 59 milliseconds or 60 milliseconds. So you can see that. you know. So this is like a few use cases, and let me show you something more. I'll go to data graph. Okay, unified schema. You go to accounts. In accounts you can see this is my primary key, and here you can see the customer, and customer is linked with this customer data of your customers. Basically you can click it here, so it will take it to customers, customer ID, address, first name. And this is the data type of this customer, or like customer method basically. Okay, so we have completed this. Let me show you one more demo. Last demo basically. Let me copy this URL. So let me go to API manager, right?
Can you answer the Ankit Madan's question? Why only customer ID one is, sorry, why only one customer ID is associated with account ID 123? Is it taking from index or how it is doing?
No, no,
Can you?
like I haven't got. See see we have like simple relation. Like we have an account. With each account there will be one customer, right? There is a no multiple customer. That is the logic. So basically my account ID is 123. If you see, right, in that account the customer ID is one. So what will happen when I will hit the account ID with 123 basically, right? So it will fetch me the account detail of account number 123. In that the customer ID is one. So then it will within like the data graph will call the method the customer by ID, where it will send the customer ID one. It will fetch the data, it will aggregate that accounts and the customer, and it will send the response back. You got it? Okay, so let me show you like so GraphQL. So I will create new API, and I will say a data graph proxy. Okay, I will select HTTP API. I will say continue. Okay, here I will use endpoint with proxy and mule4. I will give this URL. I will simply remove this GraphQL. I will give this is my implementation URL. So where this is the data graph data service endpoint. Generally I mentioned like so it unify the multiple API call into a single data service. This is my data service endpoint. So 2.0.8081. So yeah, I think all settings are perfect. I can say save. I selected mule4, right? Yeah, save. Then I will deploy a 4.40, and I will say data graph proxy API. Okay, deploy. Close. I will apply some policy. I will use basic authentication. JWT I will not use. Otherwise, it will consume a lot of time. So just I want to showcase like if I want to apply any policy, right? Separate policy. How can I do that? So okay. So you can configure policy. I will just say admin admin. Okay, apply. Okay, okay. So now let me go to my runtime manager. So it will deploy one application, right? So this is my application. Let me copy this endpoint instead of data graph endpoint. I will hit this. This is HTTPS. I, I have enabled the basic authentication, right? So I will go to authorization. I will say basic auth. I'll put it's all admin show password. That's fine. So GraphQL. So I'm waiting for my application to get deployed. Let me check. Yeah, I have to change the body bit because like let it be deployed. Let me go to a graph data graph. Unified schema run a query. I will copy this query. I'll paste it. Okay. So I'm waiting for my application to up and running. My proxy application. Go to API manager. Still unregistered. Go to runtime manager. Get started. Let me check. Send 401 unauthorized. Can anybody tell me why? Because we have to enable authentic. We have sent the request from postman to proxy, so that authentication is fine because we have select the basic authentication. But from proxy to Anypoint Data Graph, there is some kind of client ID enforcement authentication. So how can I enable that? It's very simple. So you can go back to your API manager. Before that, let me go to data graph administration, or like I go to contract data graph user. I cannot see it here, so let me go to data graph first. I will go to unified schema. I will go to run query, view current credentials. I will copy this on my notepad. So go back to API manager. So I will use the header injection policy. From there, I will inject a client ID and the client secret basically, right? So I will go to policy, apply new policy. Header injection policy should be there. Okay, configure policy. Header, uh, it should be inbound header only. Client ID. While sending the request towards downstream API, I will just then I will use client secret. Then I've added this. I will apply the policy. So generally, policy apply takes some kind of time, like 45 seconds to 1 minute, or maybe sometime less. So let me check. Go to runtime manager. I will go to logs. I will keep checking like whether policy is applied. No, I am at the wrong application. I want to check the data graph proxy API. They applied. Let me send the request. Unexpected parsing error. Let me check. Let me check. Give me a second. This is also right. Let me check the policy. Is something wrong I have done there?
Is the request correct, Jackie? No,
Which one?
the body of the request.
That's what I'm sus customers. It's correct actually. Let me
Okay.
run it there. Let me run it there also. So I'm just checking. Client ID is right. Client secret is right. This is all right. Okay. So let me run this query on data graph, and I will get the error if there is a problem with query. Yeah, getting the response here. Data graph, GraphQL. Yeah, it's fine here, but but that
Let's hit one more time in the postman and see.
no, like it's not related to data graph proxy API US cloud.io. It's a GraphQL. Okay, let me check if I've done some implementation URI is okay. Cloud up. This is all good. Yeah, this is all good. No problem here.
Can you check, Jackie, if you're passing the authorization header by mistake? If you're passing the authorization header
Where like no?
on the postman, no, we're
Yeah, this is right. Like no. So admin is right. Admin is right. Let me check once more the policy basic authentication. Okay, edit. This is correct. Simple policy.
Ankit is saying we are using HTTP, but proxy URL is HTTPS. So in the postman, are we using HTTP or HTTPS?
I have changed it. It's HTTP only. Okay. So
Yeah, it was working fine in the data graph, Yatisha.
yeah, it works fine. Okay. I have checked it. So it's like whole idea is like how you can do it. Like because this is like
Yeah, no worries, Jackie. Maybe we can proceed.
let
No
me
worries.
check. Something is with wrong with client ID and client secret. This is client ID and client secret. This is also fine. Let me check. Last time I was checking just endpoint. If I use this endpoint, this endpoints it's fine. I think something is going wrong from here, right? So you can test it. Like the whole idea is like how we can apply like different policies. Okay, so you can make use of that right now. Like so I want to show you one more demo. So basically, if I go to runtime manager, right? So if I just like stop this customer data graph API, I stop this. Okay.
So Fernando is saying maybe delete client ID and secret in Postman. I think you already deleted it, right?
Yeah, I have deleted it. Let me stop Postman. I will test it. Oh, it works. I've tested it. It works well.
Yeah, yeah, Jackie. No worries. No worries on that.
Okay. So I will test it. Like there's a no client ID, no client secret. Everything looks good. See, do I have any params? Authorization is basic is fine. Yeah, everything is good here. So let me show this one demo. So I will we will try once again after few minutes. So go to data graph. So I have stopped the customer API. In that case, what will happen? Any guess? Okay. So this is my it is calling accounts by account ID and customer ID also. Let me run the query. So generally, if you see, it fetches the account detail. For customer, it is saying null, right? And it will saying the data fetching exception. So basically, because it will always throw the big problem with this data graph. It always written 200 with data fetching exception, with data exception, kind of exception. This always written the error, right? And it always written the 200 for error also. Okay, so you can see this is customer. Let me remove this account ID. Instead of that, I will just use accounts. Run query. Okay, here you will see it will fetch all the accounts, but for customer it will give null, and you can see the error for like it has been request the like customer for 5 times. So you will see the different like 5 errors payload basically. You can see it here, right? It will, like as I mentioned, like if you are calling multiple API, if one of the API is not responding, it will throw error for that. For other, it will aggregate and the result will be sent back to you. Okay,
And Jackie, if you go back there
where?
to the GraphQL where you were showing,
Mhm.
and if you remove the customers from there, then it should
No,
work fine.
yeah, it will work, na? Because like we are not requesting anything from customer, right?
Then it will
So
work, right?
yeah, it is working again now also, right? If you see, we are getting the accounts detail, but customer detail is null, correct?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. So it's showing an exception, and once you remove customer portion here,
Now
then
it will
it's
know
not gonna show
no
that
exception,
exception
right?
also.
Because we are not, it will not call that customer API, right? Because we are
Yeah.
not requesting any data from customer. Let me check this API manager one last time. Yeah, something is going
No
wrong
worries.
from this Postman. I think something issue with Postman only. Like it is not able to recognize this query basically. Accounts by account ID 123. Something like something is extra character is going on from this. Let me try once again. Let me open new tab.
Yeah, no worries, Jackie. Meanwhile, we can start our Q&A. If anyone has any questions, we can take those questions. So Jackie, Akshay is asking a question. Data graph will fetch from public data from public APIs or private to the organization.
It is mostly a public. You can make definitely fetch from private also. Like then in that case, you have to run your data graph in Anypoint VPC, and you have to create a VPN connection from cloud up to on premise your or your AWS private. And like that is what you have to do it like. or other thing like there's other option. So basically you can create any point data graph, and from any point data graph you deploy your proxy in your cloud hub basically. Okay, and like in the cloud hub, that proxy must be deployed within the VPC, and that proxy will be connecting to your on premise basically. So what you are doing, so basically on any point data below, like you have any point data graph, then you have a proxy. That proxy is deployed in VPC, and from that proxy can connect to any data center via VPN or whatever, like so you can do that. There is a solution for that, like it's not like there's a no solution,
Okay. Any other questions? Do we have any other questions before we move to the trivia portion? Do we have any other questions? So, Jackie, do you have anything left apart from this demo?
let me
Or,
check if anything is remaining on slide.
yeah, sure, please. And then we will take on Sashank's questions. Do
I
you
think, yeah,
recommend?
I think we
Uh,
have completed.
awesome. Thank you for that, Jackie. Let me stop the recording in that case.